What's up everyone? Jeremy Gerard from Mythic Customs here with one of my customizing tutorial videos. In this video, I'm going to take you through a really cool project that you can do at home. If you're just getting started with Mythic Legions customizing, this is a great project to start with. If you've been customizing Mythic Legions for a while, this is also a project that you can have some fun with because there's some cool variations that you can do to create some interesting characters, some interesting takes on this particular recipe. So what is that recipe? Well, today we're going to talk about creating a frost goblin. So this guy that I have right here, this little frost goblin, is a really fun character, super easy to make, and I'm going to take you through the different steps. So if you follow my customizing work, if you watch my videos, if you watch my Mythic Conversation show, you probably know that I'm really into the Mythic Legions goblins. They're tons of fun. There's so much personality and character in those facial sculptures, and they're great to customize. Well, as much as I love creating new of the green skin goblins, which are known as the cavern goblins in Mythic Legions, as much as I love getting third-party heads and painting them green and putting them on, and really building out my Goblin Legion, there's a lot of fun in creating variations on the goblin race. And we actually already have a number of goblin variations in Mythic Legion's line as is. The Bog Goblin is one of the figures. It's actually the first goblin we got all the way back in the very first Mythic Legions wave. Thistlethorn is actually a forest goblin known as a fuzzmonk. So that's a very different looking kind of goblin, like an actual furry goblin. Then even in the upcoming Irithyr wave, we have the Hellfire Goblin. So there's already been a variety of goblin races that have been released as part of the line a while back. I thought it would be a lot of fun to create these frost goblins. I have a soft spot in my heart for ice type characters, frost type characters, and this was a really fun one to do. And the great thing about it is you can create a variety of frost goblins with all different heads, with different body parts, and you can really build out a display. But this is a really great recipe to start with. It only uses a few parts, but again, you can mix and match to create some different looks based on what you want. And it only uses 2 different kinds of paint, which you don't need to mix. They're right out of the bottle. The colors as is are perfect. So if you're worried about painting, if you're hesitant, this is a great project to start with. So let's look at this figure. So the figure that I used for the base here is this one. This is a Mythic Legions Thwikk figure. And as I record this video, this figure is still available. You can still get this figure from Big Bad Toy Store. It is from the, this one actually came out in the Siege at Bjorngar wave. So that's the wave that had the first introduction of the ogre scale figures, the Kurzog and the Balthor, the Tower. This was available in that wave. It was one of only 2 normal size figures, this one and the female cleric Faustia. So this is still readily available. Really, really cool figure as is, but also provides a great base for a frost goblin because of the colors. So he's got like silver armor with some darker highlights. He's also got this furry like loin piece in front that we're going to work with and have a lot of fun. So the first thing that you're going to do is you need to paint the skin. That's the first step for this project. And it's quite honestly the hardest step. And it's not even that hard. So what I did for this figure, I actually painted 2 different heads. I gave him a little bit of a variant head. So I painted this head up here, which you can see this is actually a head that came from Nubnik. So this is the alternate head that came with Nubnik. So I painted this one up, and then I also painted the Thwikk head. Now, if you look at this head, you may say, well, that looks a little bit different than Thwikk because Thwikk doesn't have those ears, which you're right. I'm going to show you how to make that. So for either one of these heads, the color that I use is this right here. This is by the brand Vallejo. Vallejo is the kind of paint that I really like a lot. You don't have to use this color, but this is the one that I think is a great color to use for frost goblins. So this is Vallejo 943 gray blue. That is the color that I'm using here. And as I said, I'm using this out of the bottle. What that means is I'm not mixing this with other colors to achieve the tone that I want. I'm using this as is. And I think that's important. Because if you are going to build out, kind of an army of frost goblins and you're not doing them all at once, you're going to do one and then come back and do another one later. It's a lot of fun when you do that. You get to build out and create different looks. It gets really challenging to mix paint perfectly the same way every single time. Doing it right out of the bottle where all you got to do is put this color in a paint tray and paint it, it does make it a little bit easier. Obviously, if you want some variation in the skin tones, you can do some mixing. But again, if you're a beginner and you just want something a little bit easier, this paint, which I got on Amazon, it's like $6 for a bottle, this $6, $7, this is what I'm using. So in the case of the Nubnik head, I just painted that as is. What I typically do is I get like a little, chopstick or something, like a little stick, put a little bit of blue putty on top, and then I put the head right on that little chopstick. I have a block of foam. You've seen a lot of customizers do this when you see their displays, especially if they're painting, in volume, where they've got a block of foam with a bunch of like chopsticks hanging out and then heads all propped on top. That's great because you can hold, obviously when you're painting, you can't hold it by the head if you've got to paint the whole head. So by putting it on that stick, it allows you to have some control, turn it around, but still get access to it. Then you just pop it right in the foam to dry. What I'm doing for this, now when you look at this head, there's two different kinds of areas. There's like the back area and the ears, which is just flat. But then there's the area around the face and the teeth, the eyes and the teeth. One of the things that I want to do here is I'm not going to base this out with a spray paint. I'm going to paint right on top of the green color that was there. And I'm going to leave the teeth and the eyes alone. I don't want to touch them. They look great as is, so I'm going to paint around them. I am going to use a very fine brush for this. This is a Winsor & Newton Series 7 micro size 000. That's what I'm using here. It's really tough to see that on there. It's very, very small. But this is the brush that I'm actually using. Yeah, it's not, there you go. That's what I'm using, and this is the brush that I love. These are the brushes I love for painting details. The tip is absolutely tiny, so I'm going to use this just to get kind of around the eyes and around the teeth. Obviously, if you make a mistake, if you hit the eye, it's not the end of the world. Let it dry. You can always repaint the eye, put a little dab of, in this case, yellow on that eye once you're done. But once you have that steady hand, you paint right around those eyes. You cover right up with this blue. And because we want some full coverage here, we're not going to go dry brushing. I'm not going to glob the paint on, but I'm also not going to wipe it off. I do a lot of dry brushing in my customs. This is an example of where I'm not doing it. I tend to use the really small brush around the face, and then once I get to the other parts, I will use a larger brush. This is a tester's brush. This is actually a size 8. These come in a pack I usually get. There's usually a size 10, a size 8, and a size 2. But I like this flat brush. It works really well for customizing. I will dip this in, and then I will paint all the rest of the head with that color. Now, this head on the actual Thwikk figure is a little bit different because it's got the helmet. So that's a little bit of a challenge because you got to paint around the facial area without hitting that helmet. Well, the great thing about a lot of Mythic Legions figures is the parts aren't necessarily meant to come apart, but they are separate pieces that are glued together. So with a little bit of determination, you can pop these pieces off. I've done shows on this on my Mythic Customs weekly show where I talk about separating parts that aren't technically meant to be separated. Like for instance, like the Elf Ranger, that head that comes in the hood, you pop that out, it gives you a lot of possibilities to maybe paint the hood a different color or use a different head insert in there, like say the Kitsune Fox heads that I helped create with Wolf King Customs. In this particular case, I popped that helmet right off, and I did not glue it back on so you can see how it comes right off. When you pop that helmet off, now you have access to that head, and you can paint that head much, much more effectively without worrying about hitting the helmet at all. Now, what about that helmet? What do we do here? So normally this helmet has these little side ports on the sides. You can see it actually on the Thwikk figure that we have. He's got these little side ports on his helmet, and he's got these red curly horns that plug in there. In this particular case, I have these goblin ears in there. Those goblin ears, and this is optional, you could certainly paint this if you just want to use the Thwikk figure out of the box. You could just put the horns in, maybe paint the horns a different color and plug those in. But I wanted to give them a little bit different look, so I actually used the ears from this head. This is one of the extra heads that comes with a Goblin Legion builder. So you may not realize it, but in the topic of removing things that aren't meant to be removed, these ears are simply glued in place. So I have a second head here, and you can see when you pull the ear off, there's just this little empty port that it gets glued into. And they're generally really easy to remove. You just grab onto that ear and pull a little bit, and it comes right off. Oh, and this time it's not going to come off for me because I'm live recording this, so there we go. Pull it right off, and you can see that ear just pops right out. Now, the ear as is, I find doesn't fit great into the Thwikk helmet, so I just slice it with an X-Acto knife to make it a little bit smaller. I put a little bit of dab of glue in that hole, and then the ear that now has been sliced a little bit on the end part, the part that would be glued in, just kind of squeeze that in, and it fits great, and you get that cool look for that Thwikk helmet. And again, you saw me pull it off. I had a little bit of resistance, but very, very little. Ultimately, you end up with a helmet that looks like this. You could also do something fun with this helmet if you wanted. You could kind of widen these holes here and put on some of the other helmet attachments if you want even yet another look for your Goblin Legions. But very, very cool. Obviously, I painted those ears as well to get the helmet all set, and then once it's done, we can just pop it right back on the Goblin, and he's good to go. So that's step number one. Step number one is going to be painting the head. Besides the head, the only other painting you really need to do that color is the neck. So the Thwikk figure obviously comes with a green goblin neck. You're going to want to pull that neck out, which, you know, just the neck just come right out here. Pull that neck out. Paint that neck up, that neck peg, and then pop that back in when you're done. But even before I pop it in, I have the figure itself. Now, I did a couple other things with this figure, and this is where you can start to have some fun. This is where you can start to do some variations. What I did here was a few things. Number one, I swapped out his feet. So you notice that this Goblin figure, normally the Goblins come with these little 2.0 style Goblin feet. Very, very cool. You can absolutely keep those on if you want. I like the idea. I like my Goblins having these big, giant, honking feet, especially my snow or my ice Goblins. I imagine that helps them crunch through the tundra, that frozen ice. So what I did here was simply swap out the Goblin feet with a pair of 1.0 feet that I painted black so it would kind of match the colors of the Thwikk armor. I have a whole other video about swapping out feet on Mythic Legions, so I won't go into great detail on it here, but it's very, very simple to do so, and the 1.0 feet do work on the 2.0 bodies. Now, the next thing I did was I wanted to add this kind of like snowy effect. If you look on him, you can see that he's got some of these like white highlights, you know, especially like around his feet and everything. Very easy to do that. All I'm doing is using a regular white color here. This is just a Vallejo white. I mean, honestly, any white acrylic paint will do. And once again, I'm using my flat brush, and this time I am dry brushing. So I'm dipping this in the paint, and then I'm rubbing this off on a paper towel, so this is very, very dry. I love to say there's just like the idea of paint, the hint of paint on there. It should be very, very dry. Remember, you can always layer on paint with dry brushing. You don't want to put a lot. But with that white paint and that dry brush, I start just going over the body part, going over the armor, and I'm focused on some of the edges, like the edges of the gauntlets up here. I like to focus on that. I like to focus on the edges of the feet over here, getting all of that armor, so all of those hard creases, all of those edges, that's where the white paint starts to collect and starts to give it that icy type effect. The great thing about the Goblin armor is it's pitted and it's worn and it's textured. So when you dry brush on it, you're going to get a really cool effect where it's going to get some of those raised elements, some of those creases and crevices, those scarred areas of the armor. Looks really, really cool. So do that to your heart's content. Add some dry brushing. I also added some weapons to this. I'm not using the weapons that came with Thwikk. You certainly could. I dug into my fodder bins and I grabbed kind of this orc axe and this orc sword. I grabbed a spear. I actually broke the spear at the bottom, just snapped it to make it a little shorter. And all I do with those as well is also dry brush. Just kind of dry brush along the edges to get like a little bit of that snowy type effect, that icy type effect on the weapons. Really, really fun. The last piece I'm going to do with the white is actually that loincloth. So that loincloth came in blue. I want to make it that white fur. So I remove it and I hold it. What I like to do here, it's actually got this peg on the back, and you can see I didn't even paint the back. But I just kind of hold it from the back. And this one I'm not even really going to dry brush as much, but I do wipe it off a little bit so it's not globbing. And then I just wipe this on here, layer that on. This one, I don't just want there to be a hint of paint. I actually want it to be white, but by not globbing it on, I still maintain the texture of that fur-like look. So very, very simple. Again, a little bit of paint on the head, little bit of dry brushing on the body here to get that look that we're going for. The only other pieces I did, this piece of shoulder armor didn't come with Thwikk. That came with a Goblin Legion builder. I just grabbed that out of my fodder bin and I used that. This little piece of fur, which I think adds a bit to it, that is actually just some extra fur I had from the loin kind of fur of a Balthar the Tower Ogre. But realistically, any fur would do. If you go to the craft store, they have fur where they sell, different fur for projects. You could absolutely grab some white fur, or in this case, it's almost like a off-white, it's kind of glittery. Whatever works for you. This is an example where there's no wrong answer. Play around, find some different materials using just the basic recipe, the basic ideas that we've talked about here in terms of painting that head, painting some of that frost dry brushing. You honestly end up with an end result with a custom that looks so much more complex than it actually was. Let me swap out his head so you can see how he looks with that. There he is with that swapped out head. Very, very cool. A lot of fun. I guarantee that if you do this, especially if it's a first project for you or an early project, you will get the customizing bug. You will want to do more. You'll want to do more Frost Goblins, because as awesome as this is, it's even cooler when you have a little group of them, all different heads, all different expressions, all different weapons. Absolute blast. So really easy. If you decide to make one of these yourself, if you post it, be sure to tag me in it. I'd love to see your customs. I'd love to see how you use the recipes. And ultimately, if you enjoyed this video and videos like it, let me know in the comments. Give me a like. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do so, and also share it with others. If you think others would dig these tutorials and the information I provide, I'm always thankful when people share this video. Until next time, I can't wait to see what you make.